This story still makes my skin crawl, even though it's been years. I used to live in a small suburban neighborhood where most families knew each other. The kind of place where kids could ride bikes until sunset and parents felt safe letting them play outside. One summer evening when I was about 10, my mom let me and my younger brother stay at the playground across the street a little longer than usual. The air was warm, the sky painted orange and pink. The swings squeaked as we took turns pushing each other higher, and the sound of crickets was just starting to rise with the dusk. There was an old wooden bench near the edge of the playground, half hidden under the shadow of a large oak tree. I remember seeing a man sitting there. At first, I didn't think much of him. Maybe he was a parent waiting for his kid. He was wearing jeans, a faded brown jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. But then I noticed he wasn't looking at his phone or at the road. He was just staring at us. Every time I glanced over, his gaze was fixed on the swings where my brother and I played. The longer we stayed, the more I began to notice little details that made my stomach twist. The way he leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, as if poised to get up quickly. How he never moved his eyes, even when a couple walked by with their dog. As the sun dipped below the trees and the streetlights flickered on, I told my brother we should go home. He groaned, wanting to stay, but even he noticed how quiet it had gotten. We started walking back toward our house, which was just across the street. As we stepped off the playground's mulch onto the sidewalk, I glanced back. The man had stood up. He was still under the shadow of the tree, but I could see his head turn slightly, tracking us. We crossed the street quickly. My brother asked why we were rushing, but I didn't answer. I could feel my heart beating hard in my chest. When we reached our front yard, I dared to look back again. The man was now standing at the edge of the playground, closer to the road. I hurried my brother inside and locked the door behind us. I pulled the living room curtain aside, just enough to peek out. The man had crossed the street too. He was standing at the end of our driveway, not moving, just staring at our house. I remember whispering to my brother to stay quiet and crawl toward our mom's room. She was folding laundry upstairs. By the time she came down, the man was gone. We thought maybe he'd left. But later that night, around midnight, I woke up because our dog was growling low near the front window. I peeked out of my bedroom blinds and froze. The man was back. He was standing under the streetlight across from our house, facing my window. His baseball cap cast a shadow over his eyes, but I could see the faint outline of a grin. I quietly backed away and went to my mom's room to tell her. When she came to look, the man was gone again. The next morning, my mom called our neighbors to see if anyone else had noticed him, but no one had. We kept the doors locked for weeks after that, and I wasn't allowed to go to the playground without an adult anymore. Years later, I learned that there had been reports of a man trying to lure kids into his car in a nearby neighborhood around that same time. I don't know if it was the same man we saw that night, but to this day, I can't stand the sight of playgrounds at dusk. I used to drive for a rideshare app to earn some extra cash during my last year of college. Most of my shifts were late at night, fewer rides, less traffic, and better surge pay. I had done hundreds of trips and thought I'd seen it all: tired commuters, partygoers who fell asleep in the back, even the occasional awkward couple's argument. Nothing had ever made me feel genuinely unsafe. Until that one spring night. It was a little after 1 a.m. when I got a ping for a pickup near the old bus depot at the edge of town. That depot had been mostly shut down for years. Just one dim streetlight still working in the lot, and a single vending machine humming beside a cracked bench. The rest of the building was boarded up, its windows covered in grime. When I pulled up, I noticed a man standing absolutely still by the bench. He wasn't scrolling on his phone or waving at me, just staring straight ahead at the empty road like he'd been waiting for something far away. I rolled my window halfway down and called out, "For Daniel?" The man turned his head slowly toward me and gave a single nod. No smile, no hello, just the nod. He was tall, maybe 6'3", and looked to be in his 40s. A long dark coat buttoned all the way up to his neck, hands hidden in the pockets even though it wasn't that cold. His skin looked pale under the flickering streetlight, almost grayish, like someone who hadn't been in the sun for a while. Something about the way he moved, or didn't move, unsettled me, but I told myself I was overreacting and unlocked the doors. He slid into the back seat without a word, closed the door quietly, and buckled up. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical. I started the trip on the app, a 30-minute drive out toward the rural outskirts, where there were hardly any streetlights. At first, I tried small talk. Late night, huh? Heading home from work? Silence. I glanced in the rear-view mirror. He sat perfectly upright, eyes fixed out the side window, as if studying the dark landscape. His face was expressionless, lips pressed thin. Trying again, I asked, "Do you need the heat on?" "Kinda chilly tonight." No response, not even a nod this time. That's when I noticed something odd. The dome light above the back seat flickered faintly whenever I looked in the mirror, like the bulb was struggling to stay lit, but it stopped flickering whenever I faced forward. I focused on driving, but the silence grew heavier the longer we were on the road. I became aware of every sound: the tires on the pavement, the soft squeak of the wipers clearing the light drizzle that had started to fall, the faint hum of my car's engine. We passed the last open gas station on the highway and turned onto a narrower road lined with tall pines. The farther we went, the darker it got. I checked the GPS. The route ended at a dead-end road I didn't recognize. About 15 minutes in, the man finally spoke. His voice was so low and steady that I almost didn't hear it over the sound of the tires. "You missed the turn," he said. I checked the GPS again. I hadn't. There were no other roads for another mile. Before I could answer, he added in the same calm, almost flat tone, "There's a road up ahead. Turn right." But there was no road up ahead, just darkness and trees. A knot formed in my stomach. I forced a light laugh to hide my nerves. "The app says straight ahead." "I'll follow that. It should get us there." He didn't reply. For the next several minutes, I could feel his gaze on the back of my head even though I didn't dare check the mirror. My fingers gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Finally, the GPS announced we were nearing the destination, a small gravel pull-off beside a locked gate that led to what looked like an abandoned dirt trail into the woods. The map showed no house anywhere nearby. I slowed to a stop, put the car in park, and cleared my throat. "We're here." The man leaned forward just slightly, enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face in the mirror. For the first time all ride, I saw the faintest trace of a smile, thin, almost relieved. Then, in the same calm voice, he said something I will never forget. "You got me home." Before I could react, the dome light flickered once, then went out completely. When I turned around to tell him to take care, the back seat was empty, the door was still locked, the seatbelt still fastened, and on the rubber floor mat were 2 damp footprints that slowly faded as I stared at them. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity before finally putting the car in drive and heading straight back toward the city. Later, when I checked the app's trip history, there was no record of the ride, no pickup, no drop-off, no payment. It was as if the request had never existed. I don't take late-night pickups near that depot anymore. Sometimes when I pass the old bus stop on my daytime commute, I swear I see someone standing by the bench, just watching the road. When I was 19, I worked overnight shifts at a 24-hour gas station just off a quiet interstate exit. The job was usually dull: keep the coffee fresh, tidy the shelves, and watch a handful of long-haul trucks roll in after midnight. One December night, a heavy fog drifted in from the river and blanketed the whole highway. It was so thick that even the bright canopy lights above the pumps looked muted and ghostly. Around 2:10 a.m., as I was restocking snacks near the window, I noticed a figure standing at pump 4. It was a woman, slender, wearing a long gray coat that reached below her knees. Her dark hair hung damply around her face, as though she'd been walking in the mist for a while. What caught my attention was that she wasn't using the pump. There was no car near her at all, just her, one hand resting gently on the pump handle, gazing toward the empty highway. I assumed maybe her car had broken down nearby or her ride had gone inside to pay, but I hadn't seen anyone come or go. I decided to step outside to check if she needed help, but by the time I reached the door, she was gone. The fog was thick, sure, but I should have at least seen her walking across the lot. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. About half an hour later, while stocking the drinks cooler, I caught sight of her again. This time she stood at the far edge of the lot beneath the glowing highway sign, her coat swaying slightly in the breeze. She wasn't facing the highway anymore. She was facing the store, facing me. A chill ran down my spine. I went to the door and called out, "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need to come inside and warm up?" She didn't move or answer. I stepped out a little further, squinting through the fog, and just then a semi-truck rumbled past on the interstate, blocking my view for only a few seconds. When it passed, she was gone again. That unsettled me enough to lock the door. Around 3:30 a.m., while brewing a fresh pot of coffee, I suddenly heard the bell above the entrance chime softly, the sound it makes whenever someone opens the door. But the door was still locked. My heart pounded as I turned toward the glass. The woman was standing right outside the door now. Her damp hair partially hid her face, but I could clearly see her eyes. They looked pale, not frightening or unnatural, just distant, almost as if she were lost in thought. She didn't try to come in. She simply placed one hand against the glass, as though to feel the warmth from inside, and stood there silently. I stepped back behind the counter, unsure what to do. I looked down to grab my phone. It took only a moment, and when I looked back up, she wasn't there anymore. I called the highway patrol. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later and searched the lot, the service bay, even the strip of woods behind the station. They found nothing. No footprints on the damp gravel, no sign anyone had been there. The next morning, my manager and I reviewed the security footage. We watched every minute of the recording during the times I'd seen her, but she never appeared on the cameras. Oddly, at 2 points that matched when I'd seen her outside, the video feed briefly glitched into static for a few seconds, then returned to normal. For the rest of that winter, whenever fog rolled in late at night, I always felt drawn to glance toward Pump 4. Sometimes I thought I saw a faint shape there, a soft gray outline barely visible through the mist. I never went out to check again. I left that job the following spring, but even now, if I'm driving down that stretch of highway on a foggy night, I can't help but glance at the gas station. Half of me hopes I don't see her standing there, and half of me wonders if I ever really did. I was in college when this happened, around 2012. I had just moved into a small apartment off campus and often drove home late after evening classes or study groups. One night in October, I was heading back around 11:30 p.m. The highway was almost empty, just a few trucks in the distance and the occasional pair of headlights flashing by. There was a light drizzle, and the road shimmered under the streetlights. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed a pair of headlights appear in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then I realized the car was trailing me, not close enough to tailgate, but staying at the same distance no matter how fast or slow I went. I changed lanes once. So did they. I slowed down a little. They slowed down too. By now, my heart was racing, but I told myself it was just paranoia. The rain began to pick up, and I switched on my wipers, focusing on the road. But every time I checked the mirror, the car was still there, always 2 car lengths behind, its headlights unwavering. I decided to take an earlier exit to see if they'd follow. I signaled and turned off the highway. And sure enough, their turn signal blinked on too. The exit led to a poorly lit service road, that curved through a patch of woods. My stomach tightened. I tried to convince myself it was just someone heading in the same direction. At the next intersection, I deliberately took a random left instead of going straight home. The other car turned left too. That's when I knew something wasn't right. The road narrowed into a two-lane street with no shoulder, and for a while, I couldn't see any houses. The drizzle turned into steady rain, drumming on the roof of my car. I tried to keep calm, telling myself I'd just drive to the nearest gas station or a 24-hour store. About 5 minutes later, I saw a glowing neon sign up ahead, a small roadside diner. I felt a flicker of relief. I slowed down and pulled into the parking lot, hoping the car would just drive past. But as I parked, the other car turned in too and stopped a few spaces away. I didn't get out. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, my pulse thudding in my ears. I stared straight ahead, trying to see who was in the driver's seat, but their windshield was too dark under the rain. After what felt like forever, maybe a full minute, their driver's side door slowly opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a dark hooded jacket, and he just stood there, facing me. He didn't move toward the diner. He didn't move toward me either. He just stood there in the rain, his head tilted slightly as if trying to get a better look at my face. Something about the way he stood, unnaturally still, with his arms hanging limply at his sides, made every instinct in me scream to leave. I didn't even think. I started my car again, reversed out of the spot, and floored it back toward the main road. In my rear-view mirror, I saw him turn his head slowly to watch me leave. Once I got back on the highway, I checked my mirrors repeatedly, expecting to see those headlights behind me again. But the road stayed empty. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in the car for a long time, heart pounding, watching the street outside to make sure no one had followed me home. The next morning, I drove back to that diner during daylight hours. The parking lot was there, but there were no cameras pointed toward the spaces where I had stopped. I asked one of the employees if they'd seen a dark sedan or a man in a hooded jacket around midnight. They said the diner had been closed since 10 p.m. the night before. I still don't know what the man wanted or why he followed me off the highway that night. But I never drove that late by myself again without calling someone to stay on the phone with me the whole way home.
When I was in high school, I relied on the city bus to get home every day. Our little town was quiet, the kind of place where everyone felt safe enough to walk alone at night. But my parents always reminded me, stay alert. Trust your gut if something feels wrong. It was late winter, bitterly cold, and the sky was already pitch black when I left my after-school art club. The air smelled like frozen asphalt. The street lamps buzzed weakly, and the sidewalks were coated with thin ice that crunched under my shoes. The bus stop I used was nothing more than a small glass shelter on the edge of the main road, wedged between a row of leafless trees and a half-abandoned gas station. When I arrived, it was completely empty. I sat on the cold bench, hugging my backpack for warmth, watching my breath turn into clouds of mist. 5 minutes passed, then I saw movement across the street. A tall man stepped out from behind one of the bare trees. He wore a thin, gray hoodie despite the freezing weather, and his jeans looked a size too big, frayed at the cuffs. He didn't immediately look at me, he just stood unnaturally still, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes fixed down the road as if waiting for someone who was late. The bus was running behind schedule that night, and the quiet dragged on so long that even the distant hum of traffic felt muffled by the cold. I tried to distract myself by scrolling on my phone, but the screen kept catching faint reflections, the man's silhouette framed in the glass of the shelter behind me. Every few moments, he'd glance my way. It wasn't a quick, curious glance. It was slow, deliberate, like he was studying me. Another car whooshed by, throwing a brief wash of light over his face. I noticed then that his lips were moving slightly, as though he was muttering to himself. I tightened my grip on my backpack straps and shifted to the farthest end of the bench. The seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, I glanced up and nearly flinched. He had crossed the street without me hearing a single step. Now, he stood only a few feet from the shelter's opening, his head tilted as if listening for something in the distance. I pretended to dial my mom. Before I could hit the call button, the man spoke in a low, almost conversational tone. Buses don't run this late on weekdays. His words came out soft but oddly flat, as if he were simply stating a fact. I forced a polite laugh and replied that I was sure one would come soon. I'd taken it at this hour, plenty of times before. He smiled faintly, almost kindly, and said, "You shouldn't wait out here alone. It's better to walk. I can walk you home." My pulse thudded in my ears. Home was nearly 2 miles away, through back streets that barely had any lights. No chance I was walking, not with him. I muttered that my house wasn't far and looked down at my phone. That's when I noticed his hoodie pocket. It bulged strangely, as though he were gripping something heavy inside. A gust of wind rattled the shelter's door and I jumped. I took a step backward, pressing myself against the glass wall. The silence between us grew heavy. Then, at last, I spotted headlights cutting through the misty road. Relief surged through me. The man glanced at the bus, then back at me, his expression unreadable. Just before the bus pulled up, I thought I heard him murmur something too quiet to catch. I stepped onto the bus so quickly I nearly tripped. I sat directly behind the driver, staring out the window as we pulled away. The man remained at the stop, standing perfectly still, watching until we vanished from sight. For the rest of the winter I refused to wait at that stop alone. Even now, years later, whenever I pass that glass shelter, I feel the same icy weight at the back of my neck, as though someone unseen is still standing there in the dark, watching.